quite sure everyone watching this video is well aware of the video format wars that took place in the late 70s and early 80s. Of course, I'm talking about beta versus VHS. Now, I pronounced it beta there because this is a tale that's often told from a US perspective, where it was a choice of either this format or that one, and ultimately that's the one that won. Meanwhile, over in the UK, as well as the rest of Europe and other PAL territories, there was a third choice. So we had beta and VHS, but we also had Video 2000. Let's take a look at it. So here are the three competing formats, and they all used the same half-inch tape, but they did play at different speeds to one another. We'll take a look at a V2000 cassette. It'd be easy to mistake this for a VHS when it's inside its box. Now this is a 360-minute tape, so that's 6 hours. The maximum length of V2000 was 480, so that's an 8-hour tape. And the quality of these was the same, give or take, as a VHS, and it managed to achieve these lengths of recording by using only half the tape. You recorded onto one side, then when you got to the end of that, you flipped it over and recorded on the other, just like an audio cassette. Now the tape on this one is completely shielded behind this spring-loaded cover at the top. And also the Write Protect notch on a V2000 cassette was reversible. Orange meant that the tape was protected, but then you could slide that across and it would block up one of the holes at either end of the cassette, which the recorders themselves used to determine not only the Write Protect status but also the tape length. Now when the cassette was outside the machine, the reels in it were locked in place using a braking mechanism, but once you put the cassette inside the machine, that was disengaged by a rod that went through a hole in the middle of the cassette. So overall you can see this was a very well thought out cassette and in many ways could be considered to be superior to the alternatives. Now, it might sound a little bit crazy bringing a third format into this format war, but in reality, Philips were there first. Not with V2000 though, this was their third home video cassette format. Their first was VCR. Yes, it doesn't just stand for video cassette recorder, it stands for video cassette recording, this cassette format that was introduced in 1972. Initially targeted at business and professional markets, but when they realised people were finding ways to buy it through their company for home use, they started selling it to the general public in 1973. Now, of course, this was very expensive, so not many people could afford it, but it really did own 100% of the home video cassette recording market before the Japanese arrived with their respective formats. Now this was actually two formats. It started off as VCR in 1972. However, in 1977, they introduced VCR LP, an incompatible format that used the same tapes. VCR LP allowed up to 3 hours of recording on one of these tapes, and it was high quality, as well as good a quality as you'd see out of early beta or VHS machines. The trouble was the machines were a little bit bulky, they were expensive to make, the format itself was quite chunky, and overall it was a little bit unreliable. So it was time to introduce a third format into Philips' range, and of course that's where V2000 comes in. Before we move on, I thought you might appreciate a closer look at a Philips VCR tape cartridge. I don't have a machine for this, I've yet to see a working one for sale. They weren't the most reliable things when they were new. These tapes have stacked reels inside them, and I'm sure quite a few people in the US will notice a similarity to a Cartridge videotape that was on sale around the same time. But unlike Cartridge that used a frame skip and showed each frame 3 times for a very jerky picture, the Philips system was excellent quality and it was at full frame rate. However, to achieve this, it did use a lot of tape. You can see at the top right here that the first VCR system ran a tape at 14.29 centimeters a second, and the maximum recording time on the longest tape it could handle was 69 minutes. However, the later VCR LP update used slant azimuth recording, so it could lower the speed of the tape to 6.56 centimeters a second, and because of this it could safely transport a thinner tape, meaning you could record for a full 3 hours on one of these cartridges. The Philips VCR really did offer a full video cassette recorder experience to those who could afford it. I mean, you could record one program while you watched another, and you could set timed recordings, all of this in the first half of the 1970s. But we're not here to look at VCR, we're here to look at its successor from the tail end of the decade, V2000. Now, it doesn't seem that Philips were particularly good at naming things, because they kept the VCR logo on here, even though this was incompatible with their earlier format. They like to call these video compact cassettes, but there's no mention on here anywhere of this being anything to do with Video 2000. That was the name of the system, not the cassettes. Of course, Video Compact Cassette is trying to ride on the success of their Audio Compact Cassette name. Now, Grundig, who were their partners in this, were a little bit more sensible. They also called these Video Compact Cassettes, but they put Video 2000 on here. And over time, things got simplified so that people just ended up calling this V2000. Here's a slightly later cassette where Philips have dropped the confusing VCR logo and embraced the V2000, and as you can see, this is one of those 8-hour cassettes. In addition to tapes from Philips and Grundig, I've also got some from 3M, Marantz and BASF, although I suppose the most ironic thing here is that these video compact cassettes are the largest of the 3 video cassette formats. When V2000 was announced in 1979, it decided to compete against its rivals on specs. Due to the fact it only used half the tape at once, of course it had the longest recording time per tape, although you had to flip them over in the middle, but much was made about DTF. That's the dynamic track following technology that Philips had developed. Using this system, the video head was mounted on a piezoelectric crystal, and that could adjust the head position automatically, and what that meant is that the tracks could be recorded on the tape closer together than the rival systems without the need for a wide guide track in between them. And also, because the heads could move, they could adjust depending upon what you were doing. So if you were fast forward and rewinding with the video still playing, then the head was adjust so you didn't get noise bars. And also the freeze frame operations were noise free and also full resolution using both of the interlaced frames, which is something the rival systems couldn't match. Of course, over time though, VHS did get better at these trick play functions, but they did it by incorporating multiple playheads. But an interesting little side note here, when Philips teamed up with Sony to produce the compact disc, Sony got access to Philips' DTF system, so they could then incorporate that into their later Betamax machines. Meanwhile, back in the UK in 1981, Philips were doing a big advertising push for their V2000 system. The big televisual event of the year was the Royal Wedding, and Philips proudly proclaimed they had the only machine on the market that could record the whole event on one tape. And then the next year, in 1982, Philips employed the services of popular comedians to sell their product. Mel Smith and Griff Rhys-Jones, who had done a couple of sketches regarding consumer electronics, seemed like the ideal people to front their advertisement for the Video 2000 system. This was a radio commercial, so just have a listen.
Morning, Squire.
Morning, sir.
I'd like a videocaster, please.
A video recorder. Anyone in particular?
Well, I'd like to have some specifications.
Yes.
And functions. I must have some functions.
I see. Did you have any model in mind?
Well, a friend mentioned the Arikiri Kabuki Kasuni, whatchamacallit, you know, the Japanese one, the 2000, because I'm very technically minded, you see.
I can see that,
So
sir.
I want one with all the bits on it, all the Japanese bits, you know, the 2000.
What system?
Well, electrical, I think, because I'd like to be able to plug it into the television, you see. I've got a Japanese television.
Have you?
Yeah, I thought you'd be impressed, yeah, the 2000, the Okikoki 2000.
Well, sir, there is this model.
Yeah, well, it looks smart, yeah.
8 hours per cassette, all the functions that the others have, and I know this will be of interest. A lot of scientific research has gone into making it easy to operate, even by a complete idiot like you.
Yeah, pardon?
It's a Philips.
Doesn't sound very Japanese.
No, a Philips. I mean a Philips. It's a Philips.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a 2000, is it?
Well, in fact, it's the 2023.
No, it hasn't got enough knobs on it, no. What's that one over there?
That's a washing machine.
Yeah, what, so Japanese?
The VR 2023. Video you can understand from Philips.
All the time that V2000 was on the market, improvements were being worked on. Grundig seemed to make slightly more advanced machines than Philips, and this particular model could play at 7 times speed, forward or backward, without any picture breakup. It also replaced the traditional tape count with one that showed the elapsed or remaining hours, minutes and seconds. It did this by reading the holes on the cassette shell first off to determine the length of the tape inserted, and then move the tape forward and back a little bit, measuring the different voltages generated from the 2 spindles so it could determine how much tape was left. Philips were also working on putting a digital audio soundtrack onto V2000, and this would have been possible due to the unique layout of the tapes. They'd also developed a cassette changer that could turn over the tape so you could record on both sides automatically without having to get up and flip the tape over. And after Sony had surprised everyone by showing off an early version of their Handycam camcorder, work then started on a camcorder-sized V2000 tape that would have worked in a very similar manner to VHS-C by sitting inside a caddy for playback in a full-size machine. Early on, Philips seemed quite bullish about the success of V2000, or if they weren't, they talked a good game. One executive here predicted a 50% market share by 1985. Back in the real world, though, things were quite different. Thanks to this Billboard article from June 1982, we can see the market share of the three formats across a number of European countries. Out of these, it was Britain that had the most developed market, with 2.8 million videocassette recorders in homes, and 900,000 of these being bought in 1981 alone. Going off the government figures, the installed user base in the UK consisted of 65% VHS, 22% Beta and 13% V2000, so not good for Beta and even worse for V2000. The next best developed market was West Germany, with 1.5 million machines sold. Here, 50% were VHS, the other 50% being split a little bit more evenly, with 27% for Beta and 23% for V2000. Of course, this was Grundig's home turf, which would help to explain the bigger showing for V2000 here. After all, there'd be a big push for the format through various retail outlets. Summing up the other countries that are listed in the article, I've highlighted a few notable standouts in bold. In Switzerland, V2000 was in second place after VHS. In Denmark, Betamax was leading. In Finland, VHS and Betamax shared the lead. But it's very important you take into account the user base at the bottom, because some of these numbers are tiny, probably equivalent to a month's sales of video recorders in the early 90s. For example, in Denmark, where Betamax leads, that's with sales of 45,000 machines in total, in a country that had approximately 3.5 million adults at the time. So things could shift very quickly. The people in Denmark who had V2000 machines had reduced to just 4 to 5% by the end of 1982. By March 1983 in the UK, the New Scientist magazine was reporting that things were getting a little bit desperate for Philips. To increase the presence of V2000 titles in videotape rental stores, they'd spent £1 million buying pre-recorded tapes for £50 a piece, and then they sold these onto the stores at a discounted rate of just £7 each. At this point, it was reported that the UK share for Video 2000 was now down to 5%, and this was despite the fact that Philips had managed to convince the EEC to restrict the number of Japanese video recorder imports, as well as to raise the prices of those to match their own machines. The Japanese had previously been accused of dumping their machines at below cost in Europe in an attempt to gain market share, but it turned out that the Japanese weren't too upset about the fact that the price of the machines would be artificially increased, because it now meant that they were making more profit from each one they sold. After all, the customers still wanted to buy VHS rather than V2000, even if both machines cost the same price as one another. But looking back now, I'm a little bit annoyed, because I now know that my family would have been able to afford a VHS video recorder earlier on in the 1980s if it hadn't been for Philips and their Video 2000 system artificially fixing the prices at a higher amount. It was as early as November 1983 that the New Scientist magazine in the UK was happy to call the format war and declare VHS the winner, but it's just going to take a little bit longer for the companies concerned to concede this fact. In the UK, it was about 1984 when video recorder prices started to fall a little bit. This brochure from autumn 1984 is when my family started shopping for their first machine. This was picked up from our local electrical retailer, and this is a Philips brochure. You can see here they're already starting to sell VHS alongside Video 2000. They haven't given up on their Video 2000 dream yet, though. They've still got the first half of the brochure dedicated to that particular format, and you can see here is a front-loading Video 2000 machine. There aren't many of those. They were mostly top loaders. Now this particular machine here was able to record with a long play system, so it wasn't just restricted to 8 hours on a tape. This one, you could double that with the XL button and it would give you 16 hours of recording on one tape. Of course, you still have to flip it over in the middle. But now we're onto the VHS machines. You can see the price listed below here. This was written in by the chap in the shop because these are the ones we were interested in. We went straight past the V2000 onto these, and the prices at this point were about £399. But look at this one here. That looks very familiar. If we just flick back in the brochure, you can see that that VHS machine was actually a Video 2000 machine that had the internals replaced with a VHS mechanism. And I believe that's how Philips started selling VHS. They used a Matsushita mechanism and swapped it inside their V2000 machines and then rebadged them. But you can see here we've got a VHS machine that's VHS Hi-Fi, so this is already going beyond the capabilities of the best of the V2000 machines as far as audio goes. So perhaps the highest end machine in this brochure is VHS rather than V2000. Going past these cameras at the back, you can see they're also selling VHS tapes as well as Video 2000 ones with the Philips branding on the side. That must have really caught in their throat. So at the end of it all, despite V2000's seeming technical advantage over the other formats, it came a distant third in sales. Philips' share of the European home video cassette market had gone from 100% in the mid-1970s down to just 2% by 1984, and that was despite enforcing trade restrictions and 25% tariffs on their competition. And to make matters worse, they were now importing Matsushita VHS mechanisms, and they had to pay that tariff themselves. The only one slight silver lining, though, was that because they were part owners of Matsushita, they didn't also have to pay the 3.5% VHS licensing fee. Now, over the years, a lot has been said about why VHS won the format war. One of the things that oft gets repeated, which is just plain inaccurate, is the fact that VHS had pornography on it, whereas Betamax didn't, and therefore that's why VHS won. It's not as simple as that. First off, there weren't just two formats, remember, there were three. So what kind of titles were available on V2000? Well, the same as on Betamax as on VHS. These companies didn't restrict what went on their formats. It's not like Nintendo with their approval system. Sony weren't there looking at every title that wanted to come out on Betamax and said, no, that can't come out, but that can. No, you could bring out whatever you wanted on whatever format you wanted. And indeed, pornography was available on all formats. The early Playboy titles, for example, they were pretty much hedging their bets there. But that isn't the reason. It's not pornography, it's due to momentum. It's about what titles were available. Yes, okay, so I'd imagine some pornography titles weren't available on VHS that were on Betamax, but that's the same for movie titles. You see, the thing is, if you're making your video available, who are you going to make it available to? The smallest audience or the largest ones? If you're setting up a company and you're producing some tapes, you want to sell as many as possible. So you don't start putting your film out on Video 2000 when that's just a tiny percentage of the market. Same with Betamax. You go for the largest part of the market, you go for VHS. I know when I was looking for a video cassette recorder with my family in 1984, we went in the video shop locally and had a look to see what they got available. It was a two-story shop. Upstairs was all VHS. There were loads of shelves sticking out, different genres, titles, all the rest of it, packed, thousands of titles. Downstairs, the shop was sort of split between a photo processing place and a video rental place. So downstairs, half of the shop was taken up with Betamax, just on one wall really, a fraction of the titles are upstairs. But then in the corner, one shelf had V2000 on it. No one would go in there and say, you know what, I think I'm going to get a V2000 machine. Even though the vast majority of what people did with these machines was record off the television, you wanted to have the option to be able to rent things from the shop, and if the title wasn't available on your format, then you wouldn't get that machine. So that's what happened. It's just momentum. In the UK especially, 70% of machines were rented because people couldn't afford to buy a video cassette recorder. The machines that were available to rent were all VHS because the companies had signed up an agreement to rebadge various machines with the logo of the rental companies. Sony wouldn't allow anything like that. They had to be Sony machines. So you could only really get a Sony Betamax machine if you went looking for one in a specialist shop. Often Sony would only let them sell them if they also sold other products from the Sony range. So if you wanted to stock Betamax machines, you'd have to stock Sony televisions as well. A lot of shops just couldn't afford that. Whereas people renting the machines, they went in and said, can I rent a video recorder? They went, yes, here you are, and it was a VHS machine. So early days, video cassette recorder cost a whole month's wage. People couldn't afford that, they rented them. Important to rent them as well because early machines had poor reliability. A report from the early 80s said that 65% of machines that people had rented had already been repaired. So repairs were included within your rental bill. Early adopters were VHS people. Video rental shops targeted the most common format. Then when people started buying machines later on, when the prices of machines came down a little bit, they looked, the video rental places were full of VHS tapes. Everyone they knew had a VHS machine. You just went and bought VHS. You didn't go and buy Betamax or even V2000 if you could find anywhere selling them. Okay, now let's get on to demo time. I've bought a couple of pre-recorded rental titles on the format that I thought you might want to have a look at first. Not many people have seen these kind of things in the wild. The first box mentions V2000 on the sleeve. The tape itself doesn't look like anything special though, it's just got the title on the spine. There isn't much more space on a V2000 tape though for any more labelling. Notice the right protect notches on this one are orange whichever way you flip them though, meaning that you can't re-record over this tape by accident. Now the other tape does come in a bigger rental box, but I notice there's no mention of V2000 anywhere on the outside of here, so I suspect that the VHS releases of this title could also use this same packaging. Now the tape inside here does have a little bit more custom labelling on it, but notice how they're just using a standard 2-hour per side tape rather than a custom wound one. And also the film is only on one side of the tape, which seems a little bit of a waste. You still have to be kind and rewind with a V2000 rental. Unfortunately, my Life of Brian tape has suffered a bit of misfortune. You'll notice the tape has snapped and wound inside it, and that's the fault of the first machine that I bought to use in this demonstration. This machine likes nothing better than eating tape, and because of this, I've nicknamed it Chewy. So Chewy is a VR2414, one of the sleeker models in the range, but still a top loader. Now you notice the channel display is missing a segment, but it's not like I was going to tune it into anything anyway. It's quite a basic spec machine, but includes picture search, which will no doubt be super smooth due to the DTF. And around the back it's got RF in and out, SCART out, and that's either an audio out or an audio in. I'm not too sure on this one. The top loading mechanism's a little bit at odds with the rest of the machine. After all, it's fully electronic. There's no piano keys on here, there's no mechanical operation, it's all soft touch controls, just like all the rest of the V2000 machines. Now before I bought that machine, I'd bought a box of tapes through eBay. These consisted of things recorded off the television. From the labels it seems like they're mostly old films, but it's not the old films I'm interested in, it's the things between them, the adverts, the channel idents, old snippets of other programs, etc. But I won't be playing any more of these tapes in Chewy until I can put him on a tape-free diet. Now I'd bought that machine from the Netherlands, where many of these old V2000 machines seem to still reside. The chap I bought it from, I think it's a year or so ago now, a little bit longer, he said it had been refurbished. I'd hate to see what it looked like before it was refurbished. Now I think in the side here this must be a date, 1984. Making V2000 machines in 1984 must have felt a little bit like you were rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Now I'd really like to show you a little bit more about the mechanism in this, but everything's obscured. With it being a top loader you can't really see everything properly, but really it is just a video recorder. You could just swap this mechanism out with a VHS one and it would look pretty much the same when it operates. It's really just the way it handles a tape that's slightly different. Let's just quickly take a tape apart though, just have a look inside here, because there's quite a lot of engineering goes into one of these, much more than I was used to with the later VHS tapes, which seem pretty cheap. I don't know if they'll be able to reduce the price of these over time, but this looks quite heavily engineered. We've got this spring in here, and one thing that took me a little bit by surprise once I get these two halves apart are the rollers in the corners here. These are proper solid heavy brass rollers. I suspect over time they would replace that material with something else. You can see the braking mechanism here, how it engages with these teeth that are along the top of one reel and along the bottom of the other, and of course when that pole goes through the middle of the tape it pushes this part out of the way, which releases that mechanism. You can also see how the right protect notch system works here, how it swings that peg into position so it lines up with one of those holes on the edge of the cassette. And look how much tape is on here. This is one of the 4-hour or 8-hour tapes, 4-hour each side, and it really fills up that reel to the maximum, although you can see Chewie's had a good go at that in the middle as well. Also, when you get to the end of a tape, you can see we've got this metal strip along one edge, so that when the machine's fast forwarding or rewinding, it will sense that strip and it will therefore know to slow down so it doesn't snap the tape when it reaches the end of the reel. Now, I'm going to leave that tape and Chewie there and move on to the second machine I bought. After all, this video isn't complete without a demonstration, and I've still got all but one of those tapes in that box to get through. This time, because I was running out of space, I decided to go portable with the VR2220. I also thought a smaller machine might stand a better chance of making its way intact from Germany, which is where this particular machine came from. Now, this portable recorder was designed to work with those cameras that you briefly saw at the back of my 1984 brochure. They attached by a wire to this connector here on the side, and the recorder could be run off a battery pack which slid into this compartment along the bottom. On either side of this machine, at the top, if you stand it up like this, are connectors for a shoulder strap. But on the back of it, you find that behind this flap there are just these two weird connectors, and that's because when you want to use it at home, you connect it up to this separate tuner and timer box that also contains an RF in and out and a SCART output, as well as the power input. Now, when it's all put together, what you end up with is quite a simple video cassette recorder. It's missing some of the features that you might expect to get on a normal machine. It's a bit of a step down from the previous one, although it doesn't chew the tapes up. For example, it doesn't have a proper picture search. You know, you can't press fast forward and play at the same time and quickly skip through a video. It's either play or fast forward on this one. It does have a 3x forward speed play though. And strangely, that plays with the audio at the same time, so everyone talks like chipmunks at 3x speed. Anyway, let's hook it up to the television and we'll just have a quick look at it. Now, before I captured this section, it was working fine, but after playing a couple of tapes, it started to develop a bit of video noise.
Free World Radio, the voice that speaks the truth. You may have noticed in their papers recently that I'm being called a thief. They're saying I left East Berlin with certain treasures belonging to the government of the Deutschland Democratic Republic. And I'm going to read some...
So what you're seeing on the video there isn't tracking issues, it's just a dirty playhead, no doubt caused by these old dusty tapes. Unfortunately, trying to reach that playhead to clean it is almost impossible with the mechanism intact. You have to take out the whole loading mechanism to be able to get to that head at the back there, and I don't have any cleaning tapes. I don't know whether they ever did them for V2000, but anyway, at the front here on the left hand side you can see the 3 pins which locate in those holes that are on the cassette shell to tell it about the length of the tape and whether it's got right protect on it there or not. Of course, they're all direct drive mechanisms on the V2000 machines as well, which was quite sophisticated for the early ones. I've cleaned both the heads, the audio and the video heads there, so it's just a matter of putting back the cassette loading mechanism into the top. A little bit tricky, but I got it all back in there, and you can see now that once I press play, even though the frame rate's wrong on this CRT, this video's at 30 frames a second and the CRT's at 25, so ignore the flicker, but you can see I've got rid of most of those issues with the dirty playheads. So let's start going through a few of these tapes. However, with no picture search and only a 3x maximum play speed, it's going to take me quite a while to get through these tapes, especially the 8-hour ones, to find out what's in the ad breaks. Many of the tapes are also unlabeled, but the most recent recordings I've found are from 1994, and the earliest are in German, and those are talking about the World Cup in 1982. So that's quite a span. The tapes tell quite a bit of a tale. There are some German language dubs of films recorded from ZDF. Some of the tapes appear to have been bought in Germany, so it looks like someone must have imported the machine and the tapes with them, perhaps when they came to the UK in the early 80s, but most of the later recordings are from UK television, and of course I bought the box from an eBayer in the UK. There's one massive coincidence though, this BGM, I thought this stood for background music, but now I think it's the former owner's initials, that VCR tape that I showed earlier on, that I bought just to show as a prop, a few months apart from the box of tapes, has the same initials on it. So this chap owned both of these things. He was a long-time Philips guy who'd upgraded from VCR to V2000 and stuck with the Philips range all the way through into perhaps the mid-1990s. Now, if you're about my age and you're in the UK, this is going to be a bit of a nostalgia trip because I'm going to show you some of the clips that I've captured from some of these tapes so far.
And that's all from the newsroom this weekend. From me, good night.
Well, that weak front has produced a few showers recently, 1 or 2 thunderstorms as a matter of fact, but they're going to die away quite soon now.
The Weetabix, if you know what's good for you. Okay.
Time is money, so don't waste it. For speedier stocks and shares, Business News is now on page 402 of ITV's new fast Oracle service.
Whatever kind of camera you use, don't forget your bonus.
It's a bigger picture bonus, a bonus print.
All kinds of film, every kind of picture can look better.
It's a bigger picture bonus, a bonus print.
That's Bonus Print, the 30% bigger print. Still only $1.95 for 24 prints. Look for our envelope through your door or at your post office.
Looking for a new 4 or 5 door car, around 1.6 litres and under £6,000. That's quite a choice. But if you want front wheel drive, 5 gears and power steering, there's only 2. This Series 2 Talbot Solara for just 5,695 and this Alpine for just 5,845. And until June 30th, number plates, 6 months road tax and delivery are absolutely free. Courtesy of your Peugeot Talbot dealer.
Well, if you've taken that much trouble to tan your hide, why bother to hide your tan?
Hopefully from that you can see what the attraction is. Nothing has the power to take me back to my youth more than the adverts from that era. However, I've still got plenty of tapes to get through, so perhaps with a bit of work I'll be able to get Chewy working properly so I can search through them a little bit quicker and find those hidden gems. I'm sure when Philips launched their V2000 system, they were never really thinking about it becoming a world standard. They just wanted it to be the European format of choice. That was a big enough market for them. After all, we were PAL primarily. Over in Japan and the US, they were NTSC, so they could have whatever format they wanted for that, and we'll stick to V2000 for PAL. Thanks very much. Of course, it didn't work out that way. The Japanese companies also launched their formats for PAL territories. What none of these companies considered, though, was the rental market. These were all designed as video cassette recorders, and that's what they competed on. The Philips had the longer playing time, Sony claimed to have better quality, and VHS was perhaps just a little bit cheaper overall than the other two. And there were more companies offering the players for these. But it turns out that that really didn't make that much of a difference. Which was the best home recorder didn't come into it. It was which one had the most titles available down at the videotape rental shop. This was something that had sprung up seemingly overnight in the late 70s and early 80s, video rental of movies, and that was what decided who won the format war. And pretty much it was already over by the time V2000 launched in 1980, which is hard for me to believe. The format war was over before virtually anybody I knew had a video cassette recorder, and that was just down to those very early adopters that had got into VHS rather than Betamax. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed having a look at this format, V2000, the video cassette format that came third in a 2-horse race. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching. Before making this video, the only time I've ever seen a Video 2000 machine being used was when I was at school. I remember them opening up a cupboard one day, and inside which was a V2000 machine on which they showed some sort of science video or something. They also had Betamax machines there. They seemed to have a particular skill at always backing the wrong horse. No doubt I probably saw a Philips VCR machine at one point there as well. Now, talking about Beta versus VHS versus V2000, the quality difference between the three is negligible. On your average size, say 21-inch UK television that was sat in the corner of the room and all three have been fed through an RF lead to that CRT screen, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. However, if you want to know more about VHS versus Beta and the quality differences, etc. between those two, you should watch a series of videos by Technology Connections, which are very good on this subject, and I'm going to put a link to those in the video description text box.
"53 journalists from 16 countries compared the Fiat Uno against the best new cars of 1983. They looked at comfort, styling, technical development, and value for money. The result, the Uno beat all of its competitors. That's why Europe's journalists named it Car of the Year 1984. So now you know why we call it #1.